I had always loved hiking. The serenity of the forest, the smell of the earth after the rain, and the sense of being one with nature had always calmed me. But after what happened last summer, I've never set foot in the woods again. Not after what I saw. Not after what I heard. I still lie awake at night, hearing the sounds of the forest in my head, those unnatural sounds that should never have been there in the first place. It started out as a typical trip. My two friends, Matt and Lisa, and I had decided to hike a less traveled trail deep in the Appalachian Mountains. It was known to be remote and a little dangerous, but that was part of the thrill. The trail was rarely used, but it was marked well enough on maps. We had all our supplies, maps, and GPS. Nothing could go wrong, or so we thought. We arrived at the trailhead early in the morning, the sky just starting to turn a pale blue as the first rays of sunlight pierced through the trees. The forest was quiet, save for the occasional chirp of a bird or the rustle of leaves in the wind. There was something calming about it, but also eerie. Like the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. As we began our hike, we were full of excitement. We laughed, joked, and took pictures, unaware of how quickly the mood would change. The deeper we went into the forest, the quieter it became. The birdsong disappeared, and even the rustling of the wind seemed to vanish. It was as if we had crossed an invisible threshold into another world, one where nothing lived. Lisa was the first to mention it. "Do you guys hear that?" she asked, stopping suddenly. "Hear what?" Matt replied, looking around. "Exactly," she said. "There's nothing. It's too quiet." We all stood there for a moment, listening. She was right. It wasn't just quiet, it was unnervingly silent. No birds, no insects, not even the distant sound of water that usually accompanies deep forest hikes. Just nothing. We brushed it off, convincing ourselves it was just part of being in such a remote location. But that feeling of being watched never left us. I could sense it too, the weight of unseen eyes tracking our every move. As we pressed on, the trail began to get more difficult, twisting and turning through dense underbrush. That's when we saw the first sign that something was wrong. The trees, once tall and healthy, began to thin out, and the ones that remained were twisted and gnarled, their bark blackened as if burnt. The ground beneath us became soft, almost spongy, like it hadn't seen sunlight in years. Then we came across something that made my blood run cold. A clearing in the middle of the forest, with a small, dilapidated cabin sitting at the center. It looked ancient, like it had been abandoned for decades, maybe longer. The wood was rotting, the windows were broken, and the door hung loosely on its hinges, creaking in the slight breeze that had suddenly appeared. "We should turn back," Lisa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't like this." Matt, always the skeptic, laughed it off. "It's just an old cabin. Probably some hunter's shack from years ago. Let's check it out." Against my better judgment, we followed Matt toward the cabin. The closer we got, the more wrong everything felt. The air was heavy, thick with a smell I couldn't quite place, decay, maybe, but not just the rot of wood. It was deeper, more organic, like something had died here long ago and left its mark on the land. We reached the porch, the wooden boards creaking under our weight. Matt reached for the door, pushing it open with a loud groan. Inside, it was dark, the only light filtering through the broken windows. Dust hung in the air, thick and choking. "See? Nothing to worry about," Matt said, stepping inside. "It's just an old cabin." But then we heard it. A sound that made every hair on my body stand up. A faint whisper, barely audible, but undeniably there. It was coming from deeper inside the cabin, from the shadows that seemed to grow darker the longer we stood there. "Did you guys hear that?" I asked, my voice trembling. Lisa grabbed my arm. "Let's go. Now." But Matt, ever the skeptic, just shook his head. "It's the wind or an animal. There's nothing here." Then the whisper came again, louder this time. And it wasn't the wind. It was a voice. A voice speaking in a language I didn't understand, but it was full of malice, of hate. It made my skin crawl. "We're leaving," I said, my voice firmer this time. "Now." But before we could move, the door slammed shut behind us with a deafening bang. We all jumped, turning toward the sound, but there was no one there. No one had touched the door. "Matt, open the door!" Lisa cried, her voice rising in panic. Matt rushed to the door, pulling at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if something was holding it shut, something far stronger than any of us. I felt the walls closing in, the air growing colder, and the whispers growing louder, more insistent. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A figure, barely visible, standing in the shadows at the far end of the room. It was tall, impossibly tall, its limbs too long, its face hidden in the darkness. But I could feel its eyes on us, watching, waiting. "What the hell is that?" Matt whispered, backing away from the figure. None of us had an answer. The whispers grew louder, the figure stepping forward, its movements slow and deliberate, like it was savoring the moment. I could feel its presence, its malevolence, and I knew we had to get out of there. Lisa screamed, breaking the spell. She grabbed a chair, throwing it at the window. The glass shattered, and without thinking, we all rushed toward the opening. I didn't care about the shards cutting into my skin, didn't care about anything except getting away from that thing. We tumbled out of the cabin, hitting the ground hard. Without looking back, we ran. We ran faster than I've ever run in my life, the trees blurring around us as we sprinted through the forest. But no matter how far we ran, I could still hear the whispers. They followed us, growing fainter but never disappearing. When we finally reached the car, none of us spoke. We just got in and drove, the silence between us thick with fear. We didn't stop until we were miles away from that place, until the forest was nothing but a distant memory. But even now, as I sit here telling this story, I can still feel it watching me. I can still hear the whispers in the back of my mind, growing louder with each passing night. And I know, deep down, that it's not over. Not yet. And that's the part that terrifies me the most. It's been weeks since that day in the forest, but it feels like I've never truly left. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back there, standing in front of that cabin, hearing those whispers. At first, I thought it was just the trauma playing tricks on my mind. But the more I tried to convince myself that it was over, the more real it became. The nightmares started almost immediately. Every night, I would find myself walking through the same twisted trees, the same fog-laden paths, only to reach that cabin again and again. The door would always be ajar, and inside, the shadows would move, beckoning me forward. The figure, tall and grotesque, stood in the corner, its eyes burning through the darkness, always watching me. But the worst part was the whispers. They were clearer now, as though whatever was speaking wanted me to understand its message. It wanted me to come back. I hadn't spoken to Matt or Lisa since that day. We'd all agreed to pretend it never happened, to let the whole ordeal vanish into the fog like the trail we left behind. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Something had followed us. Something had attached itself to us. And no matter how hard I tried to shake the feeling, I couldn't escape it. The first real sign that it wasn't just in my head came one night when I was home alone. It was late, past midnight, and I was sitting in the living room, mindlessly watching TV, trying to distract myself from the gnawing dread that had settled deep inside me. That's when I heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible whisper coming from the hallway. At first, I thought it was the wind, or maybe the old pipes creaking in the walls. But then I heard it again, clearer this time, like someone was standing just behind me, whispering into my ear. "Come back." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice was unmistakable. It was the same voice from the cabin, the same chilling tone that had haunted my dreams. I shot up from the couch, my breath quickening as I scanned the room. There was no one there. Of course, there wasn't. But the air felt thick, oppressive, like the very walls were closing in on me. My legs felt weak, but I forced myself to move. I rushed to the hallway, flicking on the light, but nothing was out of place. The door was locked, the windows shut tight. Yet the whisper came again, louder this time. "Come back." I stumbled backward, fear gripping me like a vice. I didn't know what to do. My mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation, but there was none. I knew what I had heard. I knew it wasn't just in my head. The whisper had followed me home. I barely slept that night, and when I did, the nightmares returned, worse than ever. This time, I wasn't just walking toward the cabin. I was being dragged. Something unseen was pulling me, its cold, clammy hands gripping my ankles, dragging me across the forest floor, no matter how hard I tried to fight it. The whispers were deafening now, filling my ears, telling me to return, to give myself to whatever it was that lurked in those woods. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing, but the terror didn't stop there. As I lay in bed, trying to calm myself, I heard a noise. A soft, rhythmic creaking, like someone was slowly rocking back and forth in a chair. It was coming from the corner of my room. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to see what I knew was there. But something compelled me to turn my head, to face the darkness. And there it was. The figure from the cabin. Tall, thin, its limbs too long, its face still hidden in shadow. But its eyes, those burning red eyes, were fixed on me, watching, waiting. My throat tightened, and I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. All I could do was stare into those eyes, feeling the weight of its presence pressing down on me. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. The room was empty. The creaking had stopped. But the fear remained, lingering like a dark cloud over me. I knew now that there was no escaping it. Whatever had attached itself to us in that cabin was far from finished. It had followed me here, and it wasn't going to stop until it got what it wanted. The next morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. I called Matt, hoping that maybe he had experienced something similar, that I wasn't losing my mind. He picked up after a few rings, his voice tired, strained. "Matt, I need to talk to you," I said, my voice shaking. "I've been waiting for your call," he replied, his tone flat. I've been seeing things too." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" He sighed, and I could hear the fear in his voice. "It's been happening ever since we left that place. The dreams, the whispers, the figure. I keep seeing it everywhere I go. I thought I was losing it." "Lisa?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Have you talked to Lisa?" There was a long pause before he answered. "She's gone." "Gone? What do you mean gone?" "She disappeared a week ago. No one's seen her since. The police found her car at the trailhead. The same one we parked at." The blood drained from my face. "No, that's not possible." "I think she went back," Matt whispered, his voice barely audible. "I think whatever was in that cabin, it took her." Panic gripped me, and I felt my hands start to tremble. "Matt, we have to go back. We have to find her." "I'm not going back there," he said quickly. "I can't. It won't let us leave again." I wanted to argue, to tell him that we had no choice, but deep down, I knew he was right. Whatever was in that forest, whatever we had disturbed, it wasn't going to let us go so easily. But I couldn't just sit here and do nothing. Lisa was out there, alone, and if she had gone back to that place, I had to try and save her. I hung up the phone, grabbed my backpack, and without another thought, I got in my car and started driving. The trip back to the trailhead was a blur. My mind was racing, my heart pounding in my chest. By the time I arrived, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the forest. The same oppressive silence hung in the air, and I could feel the weight of those unseen eyes watching me again. I took a deep breath and started walking, my footsteps echoing in the stillness. The trail was just as I remembered it, winding through the twisted trees, leading me back to the place I had sworn never to return to. It didn't take long to find the cabin again. It stood in the clearing, just as dilapidated as before, but this time, there was no mistaking the malevolent energy that radiated from it. The whispers were louder now, almost deafening, calling me forward. I stepped onto the porch, the wood creaking beneath my feet. The door was open, just as it had been before. But this time, I didn't hesitate. I stepped inside. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the darkness seemed to swallow me whole. But I pressed on, moving deeper into the cabin, toward the source of the whispers. And that's when I saw her. Lisa was standing in the corner, her back to me, her body unnaturally still. "Lisa?" I called out, my voice barely a whisper. She didn't move. I took a step closer, my heart pounding in my chest. "Lisa, it's me. I came to find you." Slowly, she turned, and as her face came into view, I felt the blood drain from my body. Her eyes were gone, hollow and black, her skin pale and stretched tight over her bones. But it was her smile that sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't her smile. It was the smile of something else. Something that had taken her. "You shouldn't have come back," she whispered, her voice not her own. Before I could react, the door slammed shut behind me, and the cabin plunged into darkness. And then, the whispers began again. The last thing I saw was the figure, standing behind Lisa, its burning red eyes locked onto mine. And then, nothing.